following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is Not Therapy. I'm Leanna Kersner, and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health, using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. This week, the world almost went bad crazy. This isn't a political episode, but the fact that we seemingly came very close to the, genocide of the Persian culture because Donald Trump had a social media temper tantrum. Wherever you sit on issues, adults having temper tantrums, especially adults with power in positions of leadership, I think that's something we can all agree isn't good for getting good solutions to problems. And maybe we can't agree on that. A lot of people don't like it when other adults have tantrums, but, they themselves, so they always have a reason why their tantrum wasn't a tantrum. They were just standing up for themselves or being strong or whatever. But, okay, even by those standards, the epic Truth Social thing that Trump pulled at, April 5th? Yeah. The Tuesday will be power plant day and bridge day, all wrapped up in one in Iran. There will be nothing like it. Open the bleeping straight, you crazy bastards, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. I'm not going to repeat the shot he took at Islam there. To put that in perspective, in that, form of communication formerly known as a tweet, Donald Trump, the president of the United States, threatened at least 2 war crimes, dropped a word I can't say on the radio, invoked mental health stigma, and mocked Islam, and kept going for 2 days. And God knows I haven't checked the news. Maybe he's done it again, right? This wasn't smart diplomacy. This wasn't a tactic. The president of the bleeping United States just lost his temper again and decided to throw a tantrum in public again. And with all the hand-wringing about the crisis with men and boys, we don't talk about the importance of emotional regulation for everyone of every gender, regardless of your relationship to that gender. We'd get a lot further with this stuff. The issues with men and boys and loneliness, the self-esteem issues in girls and women, we get a lot further if we had a single standard of behavior for all adults, instead of having a set of things that are okay for straight men to do and no one else. Then there's a set of things that gay men can do and no one else. Another set of rules for women. Actually, those are a series of different rules depending on your age and your race. And then there's a whole sexual orientation thing. And then there's the complete mess currently thrown at people who don't fit neatly into any of the boxes I described previously. The president of the United States used to be a job where a certain amount of, let's face it, male-coded dignity, straight male-coded dignity, at least in public, was expected. There was a decorum associated with that office. Now it seems like the highest office in U.S. land is about reveling in behaving badly and getting away with it. Because for too many people who vote, good for them, that's the purpose of power. Behaving badly and getting away with it. Now, this isn't new. It's not. What's new is how fully it's now on display. The president literally tantrumed the world into, I was going to say $4 a gallon gas prices, but I checked and it's nearly at $4.50. Maybe it's come down. It's high. Now, ironically, for people listening in the US, that works out to about $1.50 a liter in Canada, which that's nothing by our standards, because we have a gas tax that helps pay for public transit. But no, US friends, I am not going to only single you out. We are not immune in this country to political leaders acting like badly behaved children. Canada is not exempt. You may have seen the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, yucking it up with Joe Rogan about that tired old dusty thing about Trudeau being Castro's son, Justin Trudeau. Yep, Poilievre said it wasn't true, but he still laughed at something that really wasn't funny, and it's extra bad when you realize that Poilievre himself is adopted. So what exactly, Pierre Baby, is so funny about a man being raised by a man who isn't his biological father, even if it were true? And don't ask what's so funny. Don't deconstruct it. No, it's not manly. Immature cruelty is apparently how you show what a straight manly man you are now. Play along, show you can take a joke, even when it's not really a joke. It's political disinformation intended to demean a political opponent for things that have nothing to do with his character and or judgment. And yes, these are both conservative politicians. Left-wingers are immature and tantrumy in a different way. I will get to that. TLDR, if you can't wait, they spend altogether too much time raging at things like they're teenagers screaming at their parents. The problem is that we expect this from teenagers. By the time you're an adult, I can't really say adults are expected to do better now, can I? They're not. I've heard so many excuses as to why these adult temper tantrums are something other than what they are. And since I'm a person with a PTSD diagnosis, I take particular exception to these excuses. If you listened last week, we talked about the frustration and legitimate anger that I have an autoimmune disease as well. There are a lot of days right now I'm in physical pain all day. I don't throw tantrums like this. So we're going to go to our first break and come back with a separation between triggers, tantrums, and regulated anger. Because out of those three things, only the tantrums are truly a sign of weakness. Do you have a story you think would be good for the show? Are you interested in sponsoring the show? Leanna@nottherapyshow.com is my direct email. Nottherapyshow.com is the website with the contact form. @nottherapyshow on social media, where all this went down. Well, some of it. Then there was the press conference. Oh boy. Unpacking adult tantrums. When we come back on It's Not Therapy.
The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca.
We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We are still talking about adult tantrums, what they are, what they aren't, and why they're really not good for the person throwing the tantrum, even if they release emotional pressure in that moment. Adult tantrums, like I said, first segment, they're common, even normalized. Media depicts them as exciting, when in real life they're not. They've been romanticized to the point where a lot of people think that tantrums are moments of vulnerability. And real talk, they're the absolute opposite of that. They are also not just go-to responses to trauma. Trauma triggers and adult tantrums are very different things. Now, let's start unpacking this, what the difference is, with a bit about human emotional development. This is going to be very quick and obviously not, complete, but a 30-year-old has tantrums for the same basic reason a 3-year-old does. The intensity of their emotions. And 30 years old, I pulled that one out of a hat. It could be 60, it could be 80, it could be, it doesn't matter. Tantrums are, they're predominantly frustration based, but it can be other things too. But whatever that strong emotion is, it overwhelms the tantrumers' emotional processing and communication skills, and they lash out to try to regain control and relieve emotional pressure. Now, I did pick 30 years old out of a hat. I didn't pick 3 years old by accident. That's the age that conventional child tantrums peak. As a child's vocabulary improves, their emotional development progresses, tantrums reduce. Because ideally, the child is able to communicate their feelings better and receive comfort and support. They understand things better, know how to put emotions in their proper place. Notice I said ideally. That's when everything goes as it should. Often it doesn't. So there are some people who regress to the emotional age of 3 when they're stressed because they were abused or badly neglected at that age. That is something that therapy can help with. I went through it. Now there's a second developmental period, the early teenage years, when emotional regulation goes wonky with the onset of puberty. Now, the official period on the books is between 12 and 14 years old. In my experience, it's more like 11 to 15 years old. These are the years where perception is reality. Everything is a crisis. And as a society, we totally suck at handling these years. Instead of teaching teens that anger is a normal part of being human, there are just, better and worse ways of expressing that anger. Many, many people grow into adulthood believing that anger is inherently bad and scary. The people who believe this, and it is not their fault. There's a lot of reasons I'll hold that thought. It's not people's faults, but the people who believe that anger is inherently bad and scary have a really unhealthy relationship with anger. They can read as extremely angry themselves. I'm sure we've all known someone who seems to be this constant or intermittent simmering cauldron of rage and resentment, that kind of angry person, and they'll shame anyone who even pitches an idea with passion, excitement, mischaracterizing that as anger. I think I'm getting a little too specific about multiple editors I had to deal with in my time as a video game journalist, but no, there's a point here, okay? I just took that moment of personal privilege because, whoa. Think about the language we use, right? Don't be mad, but yeah. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd get upset. Yeah, these are terrible communications. And ever since the moral panics about Dungeons and Dragons that I lived through in the 80s and the moral panic about video games in the 1990s, ever since those started up, every teen who gets angry is treated as a threat. And this only got worse post Columbine and as school shootings became more normalized, right? I even heard one case where parents were told to talk to their 9-year-old because that 9-year-old quoted a Captain Underpants book too forcefully and a teacher found it scary. Should it matter that this was a 9-year-old girl? No, but it does. Okay. When people are taught that there are certain emotions that they're not allowed to feel, they risk being taken over by those feelings. Too many people are walking around trying to be, a Jedi on crack, right? The whole fear and anger, right? They think that the line is fear and anger lead to the dark side when it's not. It's something like fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering, suffering leads to the dark side, right? Like, that's the line. And these people end up joining the dark side because they think it's just fear and anger. And so using the light side of the force requires impossibly high standards. Society is destroying people's hope with that messaging, their ability to look to the horizon. Sorry, I'm going crazy on Star Wars. The point is, if it seems like you can't have these feelings, they don't do the work to self-regulate and self-soothe those uncomfortable feelings. And so we have our modern tantrum society. And this is before our brains are overloaded with political rhetoric designed to overload our brains, right? Everything now, you go on social media, everything is genocide, child grooming, mutilation, abuse, rape. You get the idea. I apologize if, that was uncomfortable, but that is the point. No one can stay emotionally regulated when you can't even go out for casual drinks with friends without hearing about this stuff because someone brings it up and they won't stop. And here's the thing. A big part of emotional regulation is knowing how much exposure to difficult things you can handle before getting overwhelmed, and you can gradually build up your tolerance with very monitored exposure in therapy. The problem is, I told you I'd hit the left. A big left-wing temper tantrum tactic is to bombard people with upsetting concepts, then accuse them of not caring when they say they can't take hearing about it anymore. I can tell you firsthand, it's not because someone doesn't care that they can't take it anymore. It's because they care very much, and their bad feelings are being overwhelmed by their bad feelings are overwhelming, their ability to process those bad feelings, right? The pipe burst that just can't take anymore. If you can't respect this, if you can't recognize that people who do care can only take so much before they crack, consider that your own emotional regulation might need recalibrating because you are sorely lacking empathy. You are persuading no one of the rightness of your cause by bullying them into a state of shock and overwhelm. I don't care how much you care or think you care about the cause, and I don't care how much you think the other people don't care. You can't shock someone into caring. They're different emotions. And yes, some people lack resilience and get overwhelmed looking at a ham sandwich. I don't know why I said ham sandwich, maybe because it's Passover. Or just Passover just ended. But you can't force someone to develop resilience. You can't force someone out of overwhelm. And if you think someone is too sensitive or someone is fragile, something's really wrong there. No one is truly like that by choice. That's probably a traumatized human that you are poking there. There are of course, I'm being fair here. People who mask their tantrums by calling it trauma or anxiety. And this is why I brought up, hi, I have a PTSD diagnosis. Got it in 2013, okay? Having a PTSD diagnosis, having trauma, having anxiety, or anything else, it's not a free pass to act like an a-hole. Listen to the accidental a-hole episode I did a few weeks back, right? And I'll unpack the trauma portion of this and why it's not an excuse to behave badly after the next break. Questions, comments, concerns, any feedback, Leanna at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website with the contact form, at nottherapyshow on social media. Temper tantrums. It's not trauma. It's not anxiety. It's a lack of emotional skills. After this on It's Not Therapy.
The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca.
We're back and It's Not Therapy. I'm still Leanna Kirsner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about adult tantrums. Jazz hands. Why do they seem to be everywhere now? And why they're not. When someone does it, that person is not tough. That person is not just traumatized. It's a skill issue. The very first top 10 phrase I ever wrote down was, don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. And that top 10 phrase, along with the others, ignoring negatives isn't being positive, about negative feelings, among other things, right? Listen twice before you talk once. Woo, that one. Stop trying to be perfect. Perfect is a lie. Oh, all of them came out of my own journey navigating a world that is utterly terrible to everyone, but it's uniquely bad to people with PTSD or neurodivergent conditions that cause overwhelm, meltdowns. A meltdown, an autistic meltdown, is not a temper tantrum. It's something different. And a PTSD trigger is also not a temper tantrum, but some people do have temper tantrums and claim they're PTSD. Ask anyone with PTSD, or ask me. I was diagnosed. The likelihood that someone will stop doing something bothersome when you ask the first time is extremely low. Most people don't. You ask, hey, please stop doing that. It's really disturbing to me. Thanks. You ask to give people the chance to be the minority who actually does listen, who does care, who does adapt the first time. You say to people, hey, I'm really struggling with the approach here. Can we slow down or try it in a different way? You do that for yourself because you have triggers and you're starting to feel like you're approaching the not great point. So you gave them a heads up and you maximize the chance of a better outcome. You do that for yourself. And I recommend everybody does it. It's a much better way to live. Now, why do I think most people are terrible at honoring these requests the first time? Now, this is entirely my opinion based on my own experiences. There's a bunch of things that overlap, but this is my own theory. I think that people are terrible at just, accepting and pivoting when, hey, can we try this a different way? This is getting to me here. I think it's shame. I don't think the people that do it are always bad people, but I think that we live in a world where mistakes are so punished that even when someone doesn't even frame it as a mistake, they frame it as, hey, help me out here. People feel shame. And I think this because One, I myself had to overcome the shame of having a brain that has a series of emotional injuries that I cannot just power through. And there was a process. There was shame, there was grief, there was hopelessness. I didn't even know there was a formal term for it until recently when a client brought it up, a few months back. They mentioned something called demoralization syndrome. It's different from depression because there's a distinct component of what, the literature calls a subjective sense of incompetence, feelings of greater dependency on others, or the perception of being a burden. Now, demoralization syndrome is specifically associated with chronic medical illness, disability, bodily, the word they use in the literature is disfigurement, and the accompanying fear of loss of dignity and social isolation. Another person put it far more succinctly. You realize the world, people just want you to go away so they can care about you from a safe distance, right? Now, I experienced a lot of anger, even unhealthy anger, when I was coping with demoralization syndrome. A lot of things back then weren't fair, still aren't fair, right? Which is why I decided to go the peer support route instead of, being a licensed therapist where I would be real and really real. And I didn't want my job to be diagnosing someone or prescribing treatment, right? My primary job that I enjoy and I think I'm uniquely good at is to be able to say, I've been there. I can relate to what you're going through. And I mean it 100%. My job is primarily to help someone feel heard and understood. Give them a safe place to feel some feelings. And I talked about that last week with Todd. That is in short supply. And even friends are not necessarily someone who can do that for somebody. I mean, my particular wheelhouse is neurodivergencies and trauma. I've been there. Well, maybe you've been part of it. You can care, but, right? Now, I am not anti-therapy, quite the opposite. I went through therapy. It was very helpful. A diagnosis can be the starting point to better, a lot better, if it unlocks proper treatment that works. A diagnosis can also be something that other people weaponize against you. And PTSD is one of those conditions where people weaponize it every single time you get angry or upset, or most of the time. I shouldn't say every single time. You're constantly waiting for, people to treat you like you're not having an understandable human moment. No, thanks to the media, people think that when people with PTSD get angry or upset, we're automatically going to become violent. So people see us as scary. Even people who were just yelling at us a minute ago. Oh, but they weren't yelling. They were just raising their voice, right? Here's the thing, okay? And this is true for, quite a few conditions. I've heard from autistic people as well that they deal with the same thing. We live in a world where people so need to be heard that many are incapable of listening. That's why I say listen twice before you talk once. I'm not terribly interested in listening to any theory of a case that makes me the problem, the identified problem, because I was responsible enough to seek treatment for myself. I am less scary because I went out and got the PTSD diagnosis, not more so. And when I inform someone multiple times, just as I'm speaking to you now, firmly but in control, when I inform someone that their behavior is a problem for me, I'm not terribly interested in how upset they were when they dismiss that information then got upset when I ended the conversation, walked out, or was less than nice to them. And I am not saying it's okay to blow up on people. No, but people get very bothered when you say, look, if you don't change tactic, I got to end the conversation. And then you do it. You know, people don't like that, but they had a choice. I've also developed a real lack of patience for people who use their diagnosis as an excuse for poor behavior. I promise we get to this, and we are. The best way I can simply separate, trauma triggers from lashing out or temper tantrums is the trigger, the trauma response, is the problem that I can't control, and it isn't my fault. But I am not required to do anything in that moment. That is something that took a lot of years to realize. Lashing out in response to the trauma trigger, now when I do that, when I slip, that's the mistake. That is my fault. And that acceptance that some things actually are my fault was the way I ended up shielding myself internally, setting that boundary from everyone around me, making me an easy target for blame because I had a diagnosis beyond depression or anxiety. And why are depression and anxiety not treated as sort of real mental illnesses these days? Like they're so common that, oh, my depression, oh, my, that's notable, isn't it? That there's this whole other bucket for mood disorders. Those can be pretty serious. And acceptance shouldn't mean minimization. Notable, yeah? I've discovered, though, that, the fact that I accept that some things are my fault, also recognizes that most of the things that people blame me for aren't. Most people don't have that emotional skill. Most people walk around secretly terrified that everything is their fault. So they're incapable of accepting any correction. That's where I talked about shame off the top of this segment, right? They can't separate did a bad thing from am a bad person. Shame. Worse, the shame and walking around secretly terrified, that leads them to preemptively shame others to distract from themselves. And this is when I know I'm supposed to say, they're not bad people. But for me, real talk, selling out others to deflect blame from yourself, if that's done regularly, that is bad person territory. To me, that's the definition of a bad person. After a point, you have these issues. Not addressing them is a character point. And it means you have bad character, right? Harsh, but simple. This is something I had to realize about myself. And no, occasionally losing your temper and snapping isn't the same as a habit of adult tantrums, right? Momentarily losing control and engaging in behavior designed to control others, these things are absolutely not the same. Now, unfortunately, if you go and look at mental health articles written by people with PhDs, they'll make it sound like momentarily losing control is the same as having a full-blown temper tantrum. It is not. And we'll tackle that after the last break. Questions, comments, any feedback, suggestions for a show topic, Leanna@nottherapyshow.com is my direct email. Nottherapyshow.com is my website. @nottherapyshow on social media. Temporary loss of control versus adult tantrums when we come back on It's Not Therapy.
The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca.
We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. Yeah, we are still talking about adult tantrums. And we've come to the final segment without really doing the how do you know it's a tantrum bit? And I've saved this for the end because online psychology articles are really bad at this identification. So I wanted to sort of do the lead up, sort of what it's not versus what it is. I see a lot of things in these articles labeled tantrums that really aren't. One I saw was like swearing when you're angry. You know, if somebody bashes their hand on something, it just goes, blankety blank. And you're not directing that at anybody. That's not the politest, sure, but it's not really a tantrum. You know, similarly, brief yelling can be an expression of fear, distress, alarm, not a tantrum. Notice I said brief yelling. But I've seen articles by therapists characterize both of these things on their own as tantrums. And if that's the bar, everyone has tantrums. So we can't challenge anyone on their tantrum. And stuff like this is part of the reason I started the show. I, want to get common standards that everyone can follow instead of these, strange bits of bad advice with PhD tacked onto it. An adult tantrum isn't just losing your ish. An adult tantrum, at its core, is a tactic. It may not be conscious, but at some point, the tantrumer learned that they would get their way by acting out. And yes, social media amplified this lesson, but it didn't create it. It isn't a sign of trust if you have tantrums only around those who are closest to you. That's not being honest or letting them see you vulnerable. Again, tantrums come from an avoidance of vulnerability. There are ways to be vulnerable. I'm sad. I'm frightened that aren't, You're not expressing your feelings when you're telling someone everything you think is wrong with them, or they always do this, or they never do that. You're expressing a feeling if you use a word that names a character from the Inside Out movies, right? So I feel joy, I feel sadness, I feel anger, I feel shyness, I feel embarrassment. Right. You always disrespect me. I never want to hear you say that again. Is not, I am feeling hurt and disrespected right now, right? That first statement, you always disrespect me, I never want to, that's a tantrum. That is not the same as saying, okay, I found that disrespectful. I'm taking a minute because I'm hurt and angry. Different things, right? Similarly, responding to someone telling you that they're feeling disrespected, hurt, and angry with, you always do this. How many times do I have to tell you? I don't mean to disrespect you. That's not showing you care about the other person's feelings. Quite the opposite. I have heard people say, well, I'm saying that because I care. I don't want them to feel that way. But how is that helping? They do. You're just telling them their feelings are the problem, and you're not interested in being part of the solution. Now, if you don't mean to come across that way, change the way you come across, right? You always do this, so what? Maybe there's a chronic problem with disrespect. Maybe just saying it doesn't help, right? Now, sometimes I know some people are feeling like uncomfortably called out right now. I get sometimes adult tantrums can be desperate, misguided attempts to be heard. You may grow up with a parent who did it, and you saw them as big and scary and strong and thought this is how to be big and scary and strong. And this is what I realized I was doing. And when I realized this, I stopped pretty quick. It's one of the most painful things in the world to realize that someone you care about won't or can't listen to you or care about you in the way that you want, and frankly deserve. But after a while, it's really better to face that feeling or other intense negative emotions than to be locked in a war with someone where the two of you just keep hurting each other in ways you don't have the tools to heal. Don't be that couple from The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. Like, yikes. Don't get me wrong. It hurts impossibly badly to let go of a person who can't or won't stop having tantrums. There is this sense that you want to save them because they can seem like a 3-year-old or they can seem like a 13-year-old in those moments. Or, the other thing is it's scary to get distance from someone like that because, the likelihood is, common sense, they'll have tantrums about you behind your back and people will believe lies about you. That sucks. I've been through it. It's not fun, but you can't control that, right? And trying to build up the sense of unfairness, the sense that your world is spinning out of control and you can do nothing to stop it. Well, that's the perfect combination for tantrums of your own. It takes a lot to rework your thinking so you don't believe all the blame that the tantrumer flings at you. I'm not good at that. I'm one of those people who, when someone goes, you always do this, I'm like, do I always do this? Like, at first, I'm like freaking Doug the dog in those moments, right? But I'm working on it. I twist myself into pretzels to try to see the other person's perspective because I just sort of believe that. And I know people say things they don't mean. And I know people sometimes say things just to hurt the other person that aren't true. I'm not good at internalizing that, but I'm working on it, So what I do instead is recognize that even if everything the person having the tantrum, everything they said about you was true, there are more adult ways to communicate those things, right? The Supreme Court may have ruled that the president of the United States is immune to the laws that the rest of us have to abide by. But this makes the Trumpertantrums, right, all the more wrong, not less wrong. With great power comes great responsibility. And Trump fails that Spider-Man test with every social media temper tantrum. And here's the thing. When you disconnect from that misguided idea that you grew up with because one or both of your parents threw tantrums and often, when one throws hot tantrums, the other throws cold tantrums, going and slamming the door, refusing to talk to their children, making the kid come and grovel an apology so that, one of the parents will come out of the room because you don't like to hear them cry behind the door. I mean, that doesn't, again, sometimes we lose it. Not the same thing. But when it's an ongoing pattern and it's used to get your way, and this is a hard thing to admit because it becomes so normalized that the thought is, well, everybody does this. This is how you get your way. I mean, when I got married, I got advice that basically amounted to manipulate your husband in these various ways. That's the only way you get any kind of autonomy, freedom, and, the only way to get him to do what you say. Maybe they're right, but I choose not to do that anyway. The marks on my soul because of the PTSD would be too grave to do that. And so sometimes you have to, well, all the time, it's better to relinquish the short-term control for the long-term trust. Because the best way to feel in control, the best way to feel on an even keel is to know you're doing as much as you can. That doesn't mean perfection. Perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect. Top 10 phrase. But you know you have taken real steps to keep things on a more even keel. If everybody takes that responsibility first and works towards more regulated, in control processing of difficult emotions like anger, fear, and sadness. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying it gets easier with practice. But you feel more in control of your life, not less, despite what the tantrum throwers in your past have taught you. Try it. It's amazing how much better you feel even when things go bad. When you can look back and go, well, no, I don't actually always do that. And I don't never do that other thing. And I'm not always like that. These are easy outs that we'd all do better taking out of our vocabulary, even if our parents taught it to us. And you don't have to think your parents are overall bad people because there's a few things that need to be unlearned or relearned. It's just everyone at some point has to recognize you're not a 3-year-old anymore. You're not a 12-year-old anymore. You're not a 15-year-old. You're an adult. And sometimes it takes a while to feel like an adult, but this is the best way I can think of to get there. Own your ish. That was a topic of a very, very early episode of It's Not Therapy. Wow, that feels so long ago. So, all right, that's my time. Questions, comments, concerns, any feedback, suggestion for a show, Leanna@nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website with the contact form. @nottherapyshow on social media. You know what I'm going to say. And in the type of temper tantrums, you're crazy is a problem because it's hurting other people, but it is also hurting you because you're not learning regulation techniques that will lead to you feeling more in control, less frightened, and generally a person people want to be around more, not feel pressured to. Anyway, your crazy is only a problem if in the end it's hurting you. See you next time.